Lebo, how many startups succeed? What's the number? Tech
It's like
startups.
it's like 95% fail, so probably less than 5%, less than 1% get big enough that everyone knows them.
Yeah,
Probably.
and everyone who's going into tech startups knows that number. I think it's pretty similar for architecture firms, to be honest, and I don't think people are aware of it.
Thank you for joining us again. This is a in-between season episode where we deep dive into a topic. If you joined us last week, we talked about the nature of work, and you'll know what we're talking about this week, which is the business of work. So if you haven't listened to last week's episode, please do so. If not, I think you'll be fine. So I think one of the business. So I think one of the things that I want to start on is something that I always felt was really funny coming from architecture, is that no architect likes to call their business a business. It's always office or practice or studio or atelier. Like why is that? Why is it so hard for designers, creatives, architects to just call it what it is?
Because money is evil.
But I think it shows sort of value. It's not for architects, a lot of architects, it's not about the money. And that could be good or bad, but especially at the high design level, there is a stigma about saying that you are in it for the profit, you're in it for the money. And I think there's a lot of issues with that, to be honest. But the positive side of looking at it is that architecture can create value beyond the financial, spatial features, good places, good buildings. That is important. And I think if you are too constrained with what is profitable, you may be limited in your ability to do that, to make good work. You might be. I don't think you're necessarily going to be.
There's plenty of profitable design businesses that are called these things. But at the same time, I think we've all had experience either through ourselves or through friends that have worked for places that aren't well-run businesses. Why do you think the industry, maybe academia, maybe just the culture of design, why do you think sound business practice is not something we think is important?
It's, again, from the beginning, it's just not emphasized at all. If you go to school, you go there to learn how to think about design, you learn how to put together a building, you learn how to, say, think about space. And if I were to play devil's advocate, I would say that's the same if you're going to learn about music, if you're going to learn about cooking, if you're going to learn about history, geography, chemistry. Right. Only in business school is your focus on business and creating profit, that sort of thing. But that's like saying that the only thing that's important is making sure that every day I wake up and that I breathe. There's all other things. There's a whole bunch of other things that I need to do every day too, like eat, sleep, do what I need to do. So it is a little bit short-sighted, to be honest. And I don't think there's anyone who's going to give you a really good answer for this.
Yeah, I agree with that. The business of architecture is not rooted on business. And I think if you ask an MBA person, like, would you open an architecture shop? I would say no one would, because it's hard to predict, because business and profit is all about predictability and the control and knowing that, if you're in manufacturing, like how much it costs to build, how much you can sell it for, you know the margin. And with that margin, you go to the investors to get your investment and start the business. In architecture's case, the principals who should be leading those studios are not valuing that as the reason to start a business, to start a studio, because I think it's more of a need for them to have agency and create, rather than for them to grow and to make a lot of money out of it. So the motivation may be different. And because of that, not many architects are savvy business people, or almost none are savvy business people. All the people care for are the creativity, the unique, maybe the way that the act of building, the act of designing. And because of that, we see a lot of misalignments and also disadvantages that is implied to the employees, because the salary structures, the insurances, all those kind of things that make a business work are often neglected.
Part of it too is there's just a lot to handle in the architecture project.
Yeah.
A lot of it is, you have to be profitable and you have to be savvy with how you deploy things, but there is a level of business savvy that you do need to have in order to just make the project work, I have to say. So I would say that there isn't one firm that is really killing it on the business side. If you look at the valuation of some of these firms, it's pennies compared to what you have in tech or in finance or even a law firm.
But why is that? Why is design? Why are the design firms not high value businesses? Like,
well, I think there's one real reason for that, which is you build a building and you build it in one place, and it's totally unscalable. It is a bespoke object that costs a ton of money, and all the energy that goes into it can't be replicated. If you compare that to, say, we last episode we used or previous episode we used the example of an iPhone. You design it once and you make 100 million of them. It's just a totally different way of running a business that just can't occur in a service-based industry. The audience is just much smaller. How many people do you know can pay for a building?
And also, it's, again, the unpredictability. Like, where does businesses for architecture firms come from? Like, how can you predict how many projects you'll get this year? You can't. It may, some design firms even, and it's not really tied to the economy. Like, it is tied somewhat. If you're doing a lot of commercial projects, like for-profit developer projects, they are dried up now because of the interest rates and because of the overall economy. But there are firms who are thriving now, who are doing maybe museum or institutional projects, or even like single-family luxury homes, who are kind of detached from the overall economy. And depending on where you are, even if you're doing something, it doesn't guarantee you that you're going to do the same project after that. So it's really like, one by one, bespoke project after a bespoke project. And if you're again an MBA student, it will drive you nuts because you don't know what's going to happen next year.
Yeah, I don't suggest investing in an architecture firm. That's just financial advice that I would go on record saying. It's not profitable for whatever reason. And I think there's also this issue that people in the discipline know that, but then actually society doesn't. You look at people like, okay, How I Met Your Mother or The Fountainhead, you think they're these big business types, and really I'm included, tend to not be. I think that part of it too is self-selecting. There's a certain type of person that wants to get into architecture, that can get through architecture school and the training and the whole process of becoming an architect. And by that point, you have a lot of other things that you have to think about and consider.
I think we talked about this maybe in one of our guest episodes, but architecture businesses are service businesses. And when you do get a project, you do have a high level of predictability of what that project is going to bring. You hire people to work on that project, and you're not really spending money without knowing what you get back. When this is very different from, say, a product business where you do spend all this capital designing, getting production facilities up front, and when the product comes out years, maybe, decades later for some things, maybe no one wants them, right? And you've already spent all this money for no return. So why aren't architecture offices good businesses when the startup cost and the risk might be really low?
Well, low risk, low return, I guess.
Yeah, it's kind of the nature of the beast, to be honest. And if you look at it from the development standpoint, we talked about this previously, how do buildings get built? The architecture fee and the soft costs are so small. The architect's not putting anything other than their time into the project. Now, okay, if you are dealing with, you do have a contractual obligation to society to make sure that the project stands up, and you can get sued if things fail. Although there are architects who don't do the construction drawings, and they're just design architects, they say, that should look this way, and they have zero risk involved. The biggest risk they have is someone doesn't like it. But from that standpoint, it's very hard to reap rewards when your risk is so low, to be honest. And I don't think that it's understood within the industry how that actually works, which is a little bit sad. I think if people knew that sort of leverage setup, people would start to probably take on a little bit more risk as well.
Yeah, so for architecture firms, there are different types, right? There are firms that sell reliability by repeating a similar type of products. So there are firms who are specialized in delivering housing. There are firms who are specialized in doing hospitals, especially. And there are firms like design architects, they design everything. So they're selling, I think, a character, a charismatic leader most of the time, or a name that they have built and cultivated throughout the years of their experience. So I think it's an image that they are basically selling. And interestingly enough, the image part is the cheapest. So meaning that the liability part, the more risk gets involved in terms of what if the building fails? So what if it that just catches fire because of a misdetailed or some sort of design issue, then that becomes a huge risk. So because of that, if you think about how the fees are proportioned from different phases of design, starting from pre-schematic, which is like concept design, schematic design, design development, construction documentation, the closer you get to the actual construction, the higher the fee goes.
Right.
I mean, certain exceptions happen, like for star architects. They sometimes only do the conceptual work, but they are engaged throughout the process, and their name gets carried throughout the process because that comes with a very high value for the developer or the owner, a brand that they can market. So that's, I think, a new kind of phenomena in the 21st century. But yeah, I mean, architecture firms need to identify what they're selling.
You just don't have a market for buildings the same way you do have for shoes or handbags or sunglasses. Those are things that, again, are also brand based. The value of a $2,000 handbag versus a $100 handbag, the actual quality, the utility is the same, but it's the brand that sells. But the thing is, you can make a lot more handbags than you can make buildings.
But I think the point about risk is also an important one. I think there's also two different kind of architecture offices that are engaged in a lot of big projects, where there's the design architect and the architect of record. And this rejection of risk has even happened within the architecture profession itself, not counting the risk that you outsource to engineers, to contractors, to all these other folks who put their professional liability on the project as opposed to you, kind of the designer. Right.
Yeah, I would also though say that there is a good reason you split those roles. Sometimes it's simply because the architect is in one place and they're not used to the jurisdiction where they're building. So you need to have someone who knows the local code or has a presence there. And in that case, it makes sense to create that sort of team.
But when does it not make sense to create that kind of team? Or am I just getting it wrong?
Well, I just think that you limit your ability to make money if you're only concentrating on design. Miku talked about situations where if you have the brand and you have the cachet and there's inherent value there, you can leverage that for sure. But if you're smaller and you're just hoping to say my genius is better than someone else's genius, good luck. That's not sound business.
Is that not how you guys are branding your practices?
No, I think for me, I would say we try to be as useful as possible. So we dig into, just to recap, my firm we do design and development. We try to get to the source of the project from its inception. We try to figure out exactly what the project is trying to accomplish. Most of the time it's multifamily housing. So delivering those units on time, on budget, and on schedule is really critical. If we can do all that and then we can do what we want creatively, then that's great. But if we don't answer those things, I have no expectation that somebody who's has more on the line, has more experience than me, has more know-how in the industry is going to give me the chance to do whatever I want. It just doesn't work that way.
You can't claim a genius out of school, straight out of business. When you're starting a business, you can't claim that your design is better than anyone else. And, frankly, let's say, if I produce the same level of design as OMA does, it doesn't mean anything because I don't have the market that OMA created, that built throughout the years. And frankly, there was a time. And let's think about like how many firms like OMA got established after them. Like there are certain numbers, like there's Zaha's firms, there's recently Bjarke Ingels is big. And then are there any other firms that, maybe some other firms like Snoera, but it's really like once in a million that achieves that level of cachet. And certainly it's not something that you can do right out of building your own practice unless you have done something that generated some claim or reviews within the architecture community, and that got spread it out to a broader audience. There are many startup firms out there who are trying to achieve that, many smaller to mid-scale firms who are achieving that, but it is also a very tough path forward.
Lebo, how many startups succeed? What's the number?
It's like 95% fail, so probably less than 5%, less than 1% get big enough that everyone knows them. Probably.
Yeah, and everyone who's going into tech startups knows that number. I think it's pretty similar for architecture firms, to be honest, and I don't think people are aware of.
But I think that what success looks like is very different. Like a startup isn't a regular business. If you're just profitable, you're not a startup. You have to achieve 100 to 1, 1,000 to 1 outside success. And that's part of the understanding when you go into this. It's about growth. It's about making, I hate to say this, but it's about disruption so that you can get that 1,000x, 10,000x growth. But I think for architects, you can sustain a business, a relatively good business, on 2 or 3 people as long as you're making a profit. And sure, the vast majority of them might not be, your Norman Fosters or your KPFs that are hyper successful, hyper profitable, but there's a lot of independent designers maybe working in small jurisdictions that are in their own mind or in their own way quite successful.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
for
I
sure.
think, for instance, we talked to Brandon Hall, and he's running his own firm. He's doing the work. He's doing the business development. There is a type of business which is more kind of the solopreneur, where the business is basically creating a job for yourself. And I think that's very appetizing for a lot of architects because they want to release a lot of the shackles of working for somebody else, both in terms of creativity, life flexibility, but then they do have to take on more responsibility. So I do think that, yeah, you're right, totally. We need to qualify what success means for different people and different entities. But I do think that there's just inherently more limitations on this profession than there are in a lot of other ones, because your focus is it's so focused. I mean, for instance, like a lot of developers, especially development firms, they can run a pretty lean shop. You have multi-million-dollar, even billion-dollar companies or managing that many assets that are run by 4 or 5 people. To do a building, you need 4 or 5 people just on one project usually. And so the scale of labor required is just different from other disciplines, other fields. Maybe AI will change that.
Yeah, and it's nothing like, developers. The reason why you can manage a larger project with a few number of people is because we're heavily reliant on consultants. So you hire consultants to work on a certain project. The role of a developer is to actually identify that project, initiate it, and bring it to life, and either be responsible of selling or renting it, and make the revenue work. But for architecture, it's highly labor intensive, and you really can't do it all by yourself. You can't. I mean, you can to a certain level, but when it goes to a certain scale of a project, then it really becomes too much. Just the pure amount of energy and the time that you need to spend on producing the drawings, producing the design is just unmatchable to the amount of work for a developer that will put into a single project.
Yeah, and I think that's important to note that the architect is the consultant for the developer. And who holds on to the asset after the project is done? It's the owner, not the architect. So you're putting in your time, but you're not taking any equity out of the equation too. The most successful developers are the ones who started small. They started very humble. They made apartments, they made single-family homes. They did something that was relatively easy to do, but could be scalable and also could cash flow later on. So you build that waterfall that then you can reinvest into the business. I think architects and service firms are constantly looking for more and more of that work. And it's not like a lawyer where you can corner a market and say, I'm known for this, or I can dedicate all my time to this and reap a lot of rewards, charge a multi-$100 hourly rate. Architects are also competing against each other quite a lot for these projects. And I think that's also really unhealthy for the industry.
We spend a lot of this conversation talking about why you shouldn't start an architecture firm. I think maybe this is an indication of how much thought both of you put into the business that you've started. And I think what's interesting is that you both started businesses that are not purely architecture businesses, but very much with a mindset of being able to produce good design. So can you talk a little bit about what went into the decision to formulate your businesses in the way that you have, and how do you think that will produce the design outcome that you're looking for?
Well, I think of it differently. I think I'm actually trying to build an architecture business. At least what architects have done in the past, like when they were master builders, when they knew how the building got put together, and when they had more ownership in those projects. I think we can, with the resources out there that are available, just upon our fingertips nowadays, I think it is possible to bring that back together. So although I'm not licensed, I am working towards getting my license ready. And while I'm working on those, I'm trying to find a different way based on my experience and the skill set that I have built upon my career to actually try to think about a new way of practicing or forming an architecture practice. So essentially, I also want to build models. I also want to do design internally, and I also want to still do development so that I can try to have an aspect in architecture practice that can be scalable and that can take a little bit more risk, but also comes with potential of higher return. So I see it as trying to diversify the practice and try to not reinvent, but just try a new way of running an architecture office. Because again, like my fascination is in architecture. I mean, although I'm doing development now, I want to run an architecture studio, or I want to run an architecture practice. Yeah, you want to build. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I echo the same thing. I mean, Minku and I have talked about this for a long time, and it's also through encounters with people like Minku and also Evan, who we've had on the podcast, Evan Wiskup, where you start to say, well, okay, this isn't working for us. It might work for someone else. That's fine. Right. It's not working for me right now. Is this what I want to be doing for the rest of my life? Probably not. And so again, I mentioned this on the last episode. You got to figure out a way to say, what do you want? And then work your way back so that you can figure out what do I need to do now? And then what's the next step? And how do I get to that place? And for me, similar to Minku, I just want to make things. I want to make places that people use. I want to make stuff that is emotionally rewarding, but also financially rewarding for me, because I cannot just be charity. I cannot give my time for free necessarily to support these causes. I don't have the backing. And by the way, this is not news. A lot of architects are very well off, a lot of successful ones. They won't say it, but it's true. And I think it's important that we just call it out. And that's perfectly fine. If you have that ability to do that, go for it. But I think what happens is people expect that I'm just a person who has great ideas and therefore I can do that. No, you need to have some sort of financial plan that allows you to do that too. So,
but that's also an uneven playing field, right? Like as competitive as an industry as architecture is, you are competing against people who are willing to take a cut because they don't need it to run their firms.
Totally. It is, for a lot of people, a hobby, a very expensive hobby. And sometimes the industry and the discipline treats it like that, to be honest, because of the focus away from business and towards just creativity. But we are in 2020. The economy is difficult. It's tight. Things cost a lot. It is not very healthy to look at it that way anymore. And so I think I was constantly trying to figure out, well, what is the source? Where does the work come from? And the closer you can get to that, the closer you can be to the work, the more you can take on, and the less you have to be struggling to make sure that trying to grab this piece or that piece. The world has changed since the 1990s, which is when a lot of the star architects were coming into their own. I remember when I was in grad school, there was a chart that Paul Nakazawa, he used to teach a professional practice class at GSD, and he's advised a lot of architects on their business. He showed essentially the increase of projects that were associated with a lot of these star architects, and it directly aligned with the flow of global capital around the world. Yeah. There's certain moments when just money starts pouring in. And so you build a museum in a small town, you build an airport there, and then you start to get these projects and it snowballs for your business. And I think that's just a realization when I was sitting there thinking about what I wanted to do beyond grad school on my own. I said, it's not going to be me. That wave is not there for me to ride anymore. So I got to find a new one.
Certainly. Like there's an explosive growth during globalization where every city in the world tried to claim that they are international. Hence, they needed to have an international architect build an iconic piece of building.
Yeah, the Bilbao effect, right?
Frank
the
Gehry
Bilbao built effect. A museum in Bilbao. Who had heard about Bilbao before that? And then now everyone knows what Bilbao is. So all the Bilbaos around the world want a museum like that.
So even for that type of building, I mean, it's not rocket science. We can see it on the newspapers. We can feel it that it's drying up, and it's not going to be there when we are at our prime. Let's say in 10, 20 years. I mean, it might be, but it will be difficult to compete against firms that has done that already for 10, 20 years. Who can secure that they can deliver that type of product, and that security means a lot for the clients. They're not going to give again, like even if I design the same stuff, like literally the same design, if I present it with a different name, if with my name, they're not going to pick it because I never built it before.
I don't want to sound too cynical, but when you go to enough world-class museums over the past 15 years, you realize that the amount of world-class museums is outpacing the amount of world-class art. And that's that museums as a product or as a project type are not that sustainable.
Yeah, and from the art world, the complaint is that, you know, museums shouldn't be a vessel of architects' ego, right? Museum is a place to serve the art and to present art and have the visitors to experience it. But in most cases, I guess because of these nature of museum design work, it becomes more of a, you know, the architect's specialty, where it becomes an opportunity for them to explore different ideas, not necessarily for the arts or the experience, but, you know, just a vessel for them to create and give and have them to be a heroic form giver.
Yeah, the museum is itself a piece of art.
Yeah. But
I would also say one reason for this is because in the 90s, there were these computers that allowed you to make crazy forms.
Right,
and so
right.
part of it too is just flexing that creative muscle that no one was able to do that before. And so a lot of people wanted something cool and wavy. It wasn't just Bill Bauer, LA Symphony, you know, Frank Gehry's work, but there was that movement, and now there's other considerations too that society values, whether it's sustainability or inclusivity or what have you. I think the context has changed, which is reflected in the market as well.
Yeah.
So let's bring it back a little bit to business. But as you
we went too far.
I mean, I think it's a good detour. I think,
but I would just say, Libo, that those things in my mind are about business. I tend to be just a larger scale thinker, and so I still have to do Excel sheets and budgets and things of that nature. But when I'm looking around the world, I'm starting to notice, where is the business coming from? And I think that if you understand the flow of capital, if you flow of money, then you can also concentrate much more clearly on your own business because you know what you can and cannot do.
Can I add one more thing?
No, absolutely. Go ahead.
The timing when I thought I should really seriously think about what I'm going to do is when I saw in graduation projects, the buildings no longer had a footing on the ground. The buildings started to appear on the sky and they started to fly. That's when I thought, okay, maybe it's time to come down to earth and think about how buildings are built rather than try to exceed the newness, try to challenge the newness.
I think this detour kind of tees up my next question, which is positioning in markets, right? We have talked a little bit about how architecture is an extremely competitive business. To stand out, you really need to be known for something. So given what you see, the wave that you see coming, what is the positioning that you're sketching out for your business that will take you from where you are now to a time when you've hit your prime to ride this wave perfectly?
How do I do that without giving away all my secrets?
I can take a stab at it first. So I think development is, for me at least, an interesting area to practice architecture, ironically, because developers have historically built a very bad image of themselves, whereas architects were depicted as like this charismatic, artistic, attractive figure, right? I think now it's time to blend them together. Like, developers are not all like Donald Trump. Like, there are certainly type of developers like that who were successful enough and made a lot of money by just like building whatever in scale and try to ignore all the ideas. But now you can sense this initiative coming from the city side. They're not allowing projects to get built like that. I mean, we're not in the 80s or 90s where, you know, the government officials have this handshake agreement, like while having drinks with their cigars with the developers. Maybe some parts too, I don't know. But I think now things are getting more transparent, and through data and through these processes, although they probably will feel quite cumbersome for the developers who are going through it, and it can be very challenging, but they are useful because it forces developers to think about how they can do better. And for designers, all we think about is how to do better, how to do great design, we are trained to be idealistic. And I think now is a good time for us to, bring that idealistic vision to actual real work, and being a developer, or at least trying to be a developer and take initiative on those ideas and try to make it happen, is for me an opportunity. That looks like an opportunity for me and something that I can contribute.
Yeah, I think you're addressing something really important, Minku, which is where is the value gap? And then if you address where that is, and then you can say, I can fill that, then you have opportunity in front of you. You have some predictability. You have a market. So, for instance, I think being around a tech environment and being around people who are more entrepreneurial has really helped me think about that a little bit more clearly. Because in architecture school, you're constantly given the prompt and saying, somebody needs
Right.
this, help them fill that. But you're never questioning what other people need. It's never vice versa. You're never going out and saying, this is what you need. I'm going to provide that for you, which is inherently what an entrepreneur does. Whether it's a tech product, a service, entertainment, anything to fill a need, that's how you build a market for something. And I think thinking about architecture and development simultaneously inherently causes you to think about where those needs are and how do you address them. And then you realize, well, actually, I could do this. Like, I know how to put a building together. I know how to add things up. The development is not rocket science, to be honest. It's pretty much just managing budgets. Of course, there's a lot of work involved in that. And then in understanding codes, understanding zoning, like we're all trained to do that sort of thing. So I think that a lot of this is recognizing, okay, well, we could do this. Maybe we should do this. So let's give it a shot. And for me and Minku, Evan, for instance, too, Weizhe, my partner, I think that's been something that has also opened up on the personal side a lot more freedom and happiness and reward than when we were just working for a firm for somebody else.
Yeah, but I just also want to stress that it may not be an answer to everyone.
No,
I think there are a specific type of characters that this type of designer developer model attracts, but it's not an answer to everything. So just be cautious of that.
We've seen it with, say, Zach Soflin, for instance. He was working in an architecture firm, and there was a need that he could fill through his skills. So once he got the confidence to do that through the incubation that the architecture firm provided, then he was able to go out on his own. He's able to get funded and able to create a product, a tech product that serves a purpose. So I think that question is pretty much how anything valuable, if you can answer it, anything valuable gets created.
Yeah. And, architects, designers, we tend to latch on different languages, meaning we get inspiration from ecology, we get inspiration from, whatever it is, where it comes from. And business is also an art. It's an art form. And money, like numbers, you can tell a story through numbers. So that's where I see that, okay, like this, there might be this synergy where we know how to construct a narrative. The only difference is that we've been pitching these ideas to developers who may not necessarily care of what we think, what we care. But when you become a developer, you start to pitch these ideas to all sorts of people. You pitch the ideas to community, pitch it to the city. And I find it more rewarding because when the evaluation is not necessarily only on the finance side, it becomes more of a dialogue between different parties, and they actually acknowledge the creative effort that you're putting in as an architect. So having a different type of communication channels actually is rewarding.
So you found that that's been nice. It's made you happier.
Yeah. So I don't know. I might sound crazy because I complain a lot about the process, but the process is where I find myself adding value. So, just talking to people and pitching ideas to different people who has different interests, I find that very rewarding and also very informative in doing what I should be doing next.
The process is the most important thing. I think, Libo, you know that from the tech side. Like the product, of course, is the end point, but how you get there is extremely important.
Yeah. And I think it's really wonderful that both of you have really crafted your businesses around your identity and what you enjoy doing almost. I think we get a little bit of it when Alex is like, Minku, like, you actually enjoy that? And Minku's like, yeah, hell yeah, it's awesome, right? I think that's also right. And it goes back to kind of our last conversation last week, or I guess an hour ago, since we're recording both of them right now, that you really do have to find out about who you are and what you enjoy doing, and then find something that really fits it, whether that's, creating an architecture firm or creating a development business or even doing a startup. And I think, to your point, Alex, about the process, loving the process, I feel, is a really strong indicator that you love doing what it is that you're doing. Like, for
Definitely.
me, something that I didn't know I really enjoyed doing coming out of architecture school was code and play with data. And that's something that through working, especially now being a low-level individual contributor at a huge company, that I just find myself really enjoying. I love sitting there for 8 hours a day, just looking at data, asking different questions through code, and really discovering and finding out new things that I wondered about.
Yeah, there's a process of self-discovery in the process. Sorry to use the term twice, but there's a process that I think is really critical. And by the way, that happens on an individual scale when you're going through a career, but also when you're creating the business. You will go through moments, and I think you will go through moments that you look back on and say, maybe I should have done things differently. But the great thing about running your business is you can actually do that. And so I think a lot of people get hung up on being perfect at the very beginning. I've made a lot of adjustments on the fly because I see how the market reacts and I see what works and what doesn't. And there's nothing wrong with revising. You're not deleting what had happened before. You're just adjusting it. And I think that sort of mentality is something that really helps to get through business. And part of it is it's a much more complicated puzzle than what I'm describing this way. But when you start to see with what works and you start to build that kind of compounding value, then the ball gets rolling much more clearly, much faster, and you pick up speed and you get momentum, and everything seems to kind of lock into place. But that's like everything. Like that's learning to ride a bike. That's learning arithmetic. That's everything that you do is hard at the first time around, and then gets easier as you do it over and over again.
But the ability to adapt and the ability to recognize and lean into maybe some of those mistakes, those failures, and adjust is extremely important. And part of that is why good startups really succeed, is they're able to pivot, change their business according to what they see in the market. And the companies that don't, especially maybe some of the more larger legacy companies who can't move as fast, you see them fail as the market moves faster, changes faster, and they're just not able to react.
Yeah, like Sears, for instance, right? Everyone knows Sears is the poster child for the company that was high on its own supply. They thought they were the bee's knees, and they thought they had everything covered. And then quickly they just kind of become totally obsolete because they didn't react, they didn't adjust enough. And there's a lot of you can look up the history and see the stubbornness that went into play to contribute to the demise of that company. And I think that's something that everyone who's running their business should be aware of. And so there's this constant effort to be very self-aware of what you're doing, not necessarily how you're perceived, because you're not going to please everyone, you're not going to satisfy everyone, but just be aware of how you're going about things. That is really important. And to be honest, if you're an architect, you're probably pretty good at that already. You just might not know it.
Yeah. Well, Alex has more years in his business now. Is it like was it 5 years so far?
Well, I think we've been kind of real. We've been incorporated in our current state for about 1.5 years. And that's when things have really picked up. And by the way, before that was the pandemic. No one could do anything about that. So there are going to be things that are in your control, and there's going to be a lot more things that are completely out of your control. And your ability to adjust rather than to shake your fist at the sky and say, why did this happen, is going to make you successful or not.
Yeah, it's the mindset. And I mean, I've been running my basic solo practice for about half a year now. And my constant worry may be, can I survive next month? And I tell myself every month is actually a miracle that I can survive doing what I like. And I guess the question for Alex, or maybe for Libo also, is it's a shift of mindset when you are just working as an employee where you're given the work that you need to accomplish versus when you are a business owner and you try to build something upon it. You feel this kind of need to constantly reach out and like try to find and you also have to be responsible. So how do you Alex, deal with that pressure as a business owner?
Yeah, so I've actually tried I think a lot of architects face this pressure. Where's the next project coming? And it's always a chase that puts a lot of stress on The owner puts a lot of stress on employees, doing RFPs, doing competitions for very little remuneration, very minimal compensation. I try to eliminate that, to be honest, as much as possible. I took a lot of, there's a couple firms out there that I've started to appreciate more that focus on quality over quantity. And I think that's an interesting approach, both from the architectural side to just focus on just one building here or there, or several buildings in a certain place, and start to build almost a district. So from my perspective too, that's a way to practice urban design, which is really interesting. But also from a lifestyle standpoint, so you know what you're trying to do, you're always hitting that target, and your goal is always in sight. You're not trying to reach too far, you're not trying to swing too hard. I think having that stability is really helpful. And I have to say that the underpinning of our business is not necessarily the architecture, it's more the development. That cash flows faster. And the problem with architecture is that you get paid in these chunks, and so you have to wait for that phase to finish and complete. And when we're doing projects, they could be delayed, they could be put on hold, they could be started up again. So we have very little control over that. The development side actually allows us a lot more stability, which we can then feed back and reinvest into the architecture side. I also teach, and so I think that's rewarding on a totally different level, but on a personal survival level, that gives me some income to stand on. But I don't think it's you have to also always constantly balance, like, what is your focus at one time. Or
I think from a startup perspective, I was a part of a startup that rose and fell, I think, within 2.5 years. So it was a blaze of glory, so to speak. And one of the key mistakes in retrospect that we made was not caring enough about the right revenue. The revenue that not only sustain your business, but allows you to reinvest the business in the right parts for your long-term growth. And part of the mistake we made was we were a software product business and a services business. And services are a lot easier to sell, but that's not something that is going to sustain you long-term and give you the margins that you need. And this is something that I think, especially when I consult, I tell people a lot is like, focus on revenue. Where is it coming from? Is it growing? And is it growing the right way? Are you going to get yourself in a situation where you have a lot of revenue coming in, but you also cost you a lot to support that revenue in a way that becomes eventually unsustainable for your business, and it can't scale in the right way that you're looking for it to scale?
No, cash is king. You got to get that cash flow. I think that gives you a peace of mind that is really important, and that allows you to not necessarily, I think we talked with Brandon Hall, the E-myth. You don't necessarily want to be working in your business constantly. If you want to grow, you need to be working on your business. And a lot of it comes down to, there's 24 hours in a day. What can you focus on? What can you get done? But if you can create those systems which allow for that cash flow to be pretty consistent, then you can do a lot more with your time to then build on top of it. I think a lot of small business people in general are just treading water constantly. And you might be providing a job, like I said, for yourself, but it's really hard to actually build a business in that fashion.
Right.
So we're in a tricky job market right now. And maybe this is a selfish question, because Alex, I know you're hiring, but given everything we've discussed, if I was, say, a young architect or a young developer looking for a company that had good culture that would, provide me the growth that I'm looking for, why should I work for you?
Okay, well, here's the pitch for Co. We do architecture and we do real estate development. We practice in a way that tries to balance the quality of the product, the built product, with the financial viability of the same product. The way we do that is very simple. We go for where the market exists. Right now, that's affordable housing. It's multifamily housing. There's 6 million units there's a 6 million unit deficit in America. I think the country is trying to get 2 million units in the next 3 or 4 years. I will tell you this, it's not going to happen by building more airports, by building more single family homes, and by building more whatevers. It's going to be done by building apartment buildings. So I would say that's what we're trying to do. Of course, I have my own personal kind of creative interest in that type of thing. For me, it overlaps with my interest in urban design. You're building apartment buildings, they're going to be big. They're often going to take up an entire city block, maybe more. They have to involve community. Nowadays, they have to involve open space. So there's a very strong connection that we've crafted, in my opinion. I'll say this pretty boldly, a very strong connection between what we are trying to do intellectually and how we're doing it from a business standpoint, that I think I can translate to anybody. I can communicate to anybody who wants to come work for me. And the hard part right now, I would say, is that we still don't have complete control over anything. I mean, we talked about how buildings get built before. If the permit isn't coming through, if the land doesn't exist, if we can't close on the deal, if our partners are not ready to move on, we're still held up. So we have to make sure that we can build sustainably and grow sustainably. And sometimes that means preferencing one aspect of the business over another, or forefronting that, so that if we invest here, that will flow to the other side of the business. And that's more or less where our head is at right now in terms of thinking how we want to grow.
What about you, Minku? Solo practitioner for life?
Well, yeah. Well, back to my point, every month is a miracle. So, well, I don't have a strong vision of what the future holds for me, but I do have a intuitive reaction towards what Alex just said, that I also practice mostly on the affordable housing side, but I am a practitioner in the market rate side of housing. And even in the market rate side, I think there are many things that we can contribute to shorten the housing gap. And one thing is to find, as a developer, you have the unique skill set to actually form a team. And this team includes not only just the architecture and the engineering side, it includes the financing side. And there are incentives out there, incentivize investors, and cities are also incentivized to build more housing. But what I'm getting more into is related to the downtown office conversions. So, I mean, it's no secret that the office vacancy rate is rising. I think in a few projects that I've reviewed, the vacancy rates in Boston in these couple of buildings were at like 60, 65. So these are not creating any revenue. And the owners of these type of buildings are not really savvy developers or architects. They don't know how to deal with it. They either inherited this building from their past generation, or it is owned and operated by a portfolio, like part of a REITs or something. So it's also a question for them, and it hasn't collapsed yet, but it's nearing by. Everyone can feel it, and the city, especially when the office collapses, the downtown office spaces collapses. What do you think will happen with the tax revenues that they were collecting? So cities will be running out of money very quickly. So they are incentivizing these downtown office spaces to be converted to residential, where I think this might be an opportunity for people like me can contribute, right? I mean, if you have the right source of investors, and if you can identify a good opportunity that can also get incentivized by the city, and the incentivized by the city, meaning not just in terms of tax breaks, but they can also streamline the approval processes that, if it's not incentivized, may take up to like 3, 4, even 5 years. But if they are willing to push this forward on behalf of your project, then it can be done in like 1 or 2 one year, hopefully. So that is quite a lot of support. So I think my sense now is, okay, like I'm thinking of investing more and more of my time to actually approach this from an architect's lens, right? To think about how architects do research. They start with the market, they try to identify what the needs are. They also look into the type of building footprints, and also identify the challenges that's involved architecturally, physically, of converting an actual office to a residential. And the challenge is real, but it's something that can be overcome. So I think that might be an interesting challenge to me personally, and it might be an opportunity if I can actually close it, because then it will be a step up in terms of a project scale. And also, I'm very interested in doing that now.
You know what's so important about what you just said, Minku, talking about this office to residential conversion? There isn't a single person, I think, who lives in Boston who thinks that downtown should just continue to languish like it is. The market for that, the audience for that is so wide. It doesn't matter if you're from the city side, if you're from the residential side, if you're from your real estate developer, or you're just someone who happens to work downtown. Like, you want that to improve. And so the problem is, there are a lot of voices in the room. There's a lot of value that is being discussed and kind of contested maybe, but there's no one there to come in and do it, to bring it all together. And if you can be that connector and be the person who makes everyone's life better, to be honest, you can do a lot of good and make a lot of money, or have a very successful business. We bemoan the challenges that face our society right now, but if there's someone who can come in and untangle that, you don't have to be an architect. You could be a developer, you could be a lawyer, you could be anybody. But if you can come in and untangle that mess for people, you can do a lot of good.
Yeah, and Leo, to your point, being nimble is what I think this type of work needs. So as a solo practitioner, you have a flexibility in time. Like, of course, I have obligations to other actual work that I need to put
Right.
in time and I need to work on to have it successfully built. But there are time that I can carve out outside of that work, like in between fillers, that I can invest in these type of finding a new opportunity, not just waiting for a project to fall on my desk, but actively apply the research skills that you have learned through your experience and in your career as an architect to actively discover the opportunities. And if you have, and through the connections that I built by doing development, the connections in finance, the architecture, engineering, like you have the ability to form a team to actually execute these type of projects. So that's, to me, becoming a new interesting challenge that I want to spend my time on. And if you're a developer, you need to love your project, you need to romance it, right? Like, it's a painful process, but like I might sound like a pervert, but but you have to. It's a painful process, but you find joy in it. You have to find joy in it in order to push it through. So
But you also bring up an interesting point. A lot of question is, if you approach any career, you can ask, is it more important what you know or who you know? I think all the careers that involve the built environment, it's pretty even between what you know and who you know. You need to be able to have expertise in something, demonstrated expertise in something. At the same time, just having that expertise is not going to enable you to do that work, because we're dealing at such a large public scale. You need to have people who trust you, who like you, and can help authorize you to, or bring you in on the project to do that work. So it is a very interesting way of going about things, because you're constantly struggling with, oh, should I be at my computer working or should I be out there talking? And striking that balance is critical.
But I think also part of it is that as a business, you're not only building a team as a business, but you're building a partnership across businesses. Your team is not just who's in your company, it's also everyone else that you're working with, and making sure that you have people that you trust working inside your company, but also people that you trust working with you across is extremely important. And I think maybe part of what's really great about what you do, Minku, is your focus on bringing the right people together to make something.
Yeah, I think that's so important. So my focus is actually into creating a network of professionals where we are somewhat like-minded and somewhat mission-driven to achieve a certain level of sustainability, resiliency, and also hopefully affordability. Because I also rent a place. I don't own yet, and it's a personal struggle to find a good place to live, and that's fundamental. And I think that's shared across the board. So if I can contribute in delivering that, I think that will be very meaningful work for me.
So maybe as we wrap, one thing that I want to ask, kind of going around, what is one piece of business advice that you've received that you've really internalized? And what's one piece of business advice you would give to someone else?
This isn't business advice, but it's a Ray Dalio quote where it basically says, if you don't look back a year ago and think to yourself, wow, how stupid was I back then? Then you haven't learned enough. And you can take that within the academic context and say, okay, I was in grade 2 and now I'm grade 3 and I learned how to do this, and I was dumb back then. But I think in the business context, it means if you haven't done enough to really understand what you did wrong back then, or you don't have enough check marks or moments where you can say, man, I could have been better, then you haven't put yourself out there enough and you haven't tried enough new things. Like I said, entrepreneurship is about making mistakes in a very non-fatal way, in a very measured and manageable and productive way. And so if you're not comfortable enough to do that yet, then I don't think you're ready to run a business.
Yeah. I think for me, understanding the value of your time is critical. So every hour, every minute has a value. It may not be directly translated to monetary value. Like for some work, you work as an hourly rate. So like, I don't know, 150, 200, 300, whatever. And as a business owner, you can determine what is the fair market value of your time. And based on the actual projects that you're delivering, then you can reference that as thinking, okay, is this time the same value if I invest it into some other work that is not paying now, but you think that it will pay, it will yield to something later on, then it is valuable. So I think I get more sensitive in terms of where I spend my time. And that's something that I haven't thought about. And I actually religiously track my time too in the calendars. So because A, like that's how I send out invoices, and B, that gives me an understanding and an opportunity to look back. And it's basically a tracking and archiving the way that you have, spent your time in the week or the weekends. And, it just is a good practice to understand. And then it also makes you think, okay, like if I need to increase my value, what should I be doing? Like, how can I increase my value? So that's where my head is at now.
I think that's 100% true. You need to be able to measure your time. And there are going to be moments when that doesn't matter to you because it's just something that's so important or you're so passionate about. But when it comes down to making decisions about should I do this or should I do that, that metric is extremely helpful, and it just clarifies things. So you're not constantly anxious about, oh, I should have done that, or maybe I made the wrong choice.
So I think the best advice I've gotten kind of fits in with yours, Minku. It's from this guy, Matt Mockery, who's a executive coach to a lot of CEOs in Silicon Valley startups. He has like an open Google Doc with kind of all his advice. And one piece of advice he has is on energizing versus de-energizing time. Part of the exercise is, hey, you go through your calendar, you look at everything that you're doing, you just label it energizing and de-energizing. And you try to find that balance where you're spending the vast majority of your time on energizing activities. And you're not going to have zero de-energizing activities because you still need to run a business, but you try to minimize that. You try to either make it more efficient, you try to delegate, and that helps you kind of spend more of your time on the things that not only energize you, but because they energize you, get you into a place where you provide the best value to your business.
Yeah, for sure. 100%.
The one piece of advice I would have, which is maybe something for my earlier self, is to have manic focus on the goal that you have. Not only a long-term goal, but also the short-term goals for you to get there. If you evaluate your short-term goal, maybe a 1 month or a 2 month goal, and you don't get there, really dive in and understand why. It's not like, hey, like I just didn't do well, but analyze why you didn't do well. It's not something for you to feel bad about, but it's something that will make you better.
Golden.
No, Libo, what you're saying is true. I think being self-aware and being willing to critique yourself in a productive way, in the same way that you would productively and constructively critique a friend or a family member, I think is really essential, because when you're on your own, after you've worked for a while, it can feel a little bit isolating. You can feel a little bit lonely.
Yeah.
So having that support is also really important. Making sure that you have people you can talk to.
Yeah.
Well,
I mean,
you have us.
Yeah, that's why we're all here.
Hit the subscribe button.
No, I mean, I think that's what we're here for, right? We're also trying to build that community and make sure that some of these things that people don't really talk about, or they only read about, or they only think about, can actually be said. And this conversation for me has caused me to rethink a lot of what I already interpret and what I already value. And I think having those sort of exercises are extremely, extremely helpful.
So if you're listening to this and you want to come talk to us about this, let us know, and we'll be happy to maybe have you as a guest on our podcast. And again, thank you for listening to this 2-part episode. Again, if you haven't heard our first part, go to last week's episode where we talk about the nature of work. And this has been another Most Potter. Thank you.
Great.